I'm Aaron Moorhead, and I'm joined by Andrew Adams,
Hello, everyone.
filmmaker behind American Meltdown, and welcome to the internet version of the Chattanooga Film Festival.
Yeah.
Everyone's applauding in their living room.
I love
Uh,
it. We have to wait 8 minutes for the standing ovation to end, right?
yeah, actually, all right, we'll pause for that.
Okay. Yeah.
So I'm told that we have only about 4 or 5 hours to talk.
Okay, great.
So I'm
That's
just gonna start with some
not quite enough time, but we'll figure it out.
really basic, boring questions. How are you today?
I'm good. It's good to see you, man.
Where are you today?
I am in my I'm live at Chattanooga at midnight, or I'm pre-recording this in my father's guest bedroom. One of
Very,
the two. Hard to say.
but you are at, when people are able to watch this, are you at the Chattanooga Film Festival? Are you going to be
Yeah,
there?
I'm probably I'm here because I'm going to the airport tonight to go to Chattanooga, and then I am also probably live in the comments somewhere. So come hang out with me.
You're like Schrodinger's Andrew, they're
Exactly.
both there
Yeah.
and not there.
Yes.
Um,
But this is actually fittingly, I spent a lot of the pandemic in this room. This was my desk during a lot of the pandemic, and it's where I wrote a lot of the script. So it
really?
kind of feels like it's coming a little full circle to like be here on my way to the film festival to go premiere it with everyone.
How does that feel?
It feels crazy and really fun and exciting. It also feels so awesome that you are here specifically because for those of I'm sure that some of the Chattanooga people here are like, oh, cool, it's Aaron. He's directed many features of his own, been working on Loki and Moonlight and Archive 81. But for me, it's like my old film school buddy, which is the most exciting thing.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, actually, I mean that's kind of where's a fun place to start is the reason that besides liking the film, the reason that I would be a good person to talk to you is we go back to the year 2006, I think. Um, I've shot a film for you.
yes,
You have
my
also been my
college
camera
thesis film.
assistant.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've been through some trenches together.
Yeah.
Um, and then also, I saw what you did with Resolution, making your own movies and everything it springboarded you to. And it got into my brain of like, so that's how you go do it. And it kind of like seeded this idea that I just had to go make movies on my own. And like, I can draw a one-to-one connection between stuff you did and me being like, you know what? It's time. I'm going to go make a feature.
Tell me more about that. Give me a timeline and all that.
Like a timeline of what the whole process was.
About when you were like, I've got to just go make a movie. More like
Yeah,
talk about that exact moment. Where were you in your life?
yeah. Well, so I remember like graduating film school and being kind of naively thinking like I'm going to go make $200 million movies next year. And so I was writing these like gigantic big budget sci-fi things and then I had no idea what to do with them. So I started doing this process of like scaling down my ambitions in terms of like budget and everything. And so my scripts started getting smaller and smaller, but even then it took me a long time to realize that $10 million felt outside my wheelhouse at the time. So then I wrote a $1 million one. And even that, I was like, I don't know how to raise money for that. So before the pandemic started, I went to Sundance in like 2018 or something. I think it was 2018. And I was so inspired by just all the Q&As. And I was like, I'm going to go make a movie on my own on my family's farm in Maryland. So I reverse engineered something that was relatively small, had someone break it down, and the budget still came in at like $200,000. And it's like, okay, that I can figure that out. That's doable. But there were a couple scenes in it that I couldn't quite crack. I didn't know how to raise the money. So those were the two question marks I had was like, where does this money come from? And how do I pull off like the fight scene? Um, and then when the pandemic started, I was doing travel videography. So I actually had this huge assignment set up. I was going to go from Antarctica to the Amazon. We flew to Argentina on the day the pandemic was declared, and we landed. And in the airport, I like stepped out of the plane, and all the screens were like, "Hey, you might not want to be here." And we just had a few days of chaos, packed it all up, came home. Weirdly, the Backstreet Boys also were touring in Argentina and canceled their tour at the same time, so we flew back on the plane with them. But when I got home and I was trying to figure out what to do, I had just like lost this job. I was freaked out about rent. And I was looking at this project I had tried to make, and I realized that even that had been slightly too ambitious. So at the start of the pandemic, I was kind of like, you know what? I'm going to come out of this with a movie, and I'm going to reverse engineer it to be so small that nobody can stop me from doing it. And so every single scene that I wrote was designed to be like locations I could find on Airbnb or minimal effects that I could do with my iPhone or whatever. Um, so that by the time I was done the script, I felt like no one could stop me, and then I just had to go figure out how to make it as cool as possible.
That's the story. That's what needs to happen if you're ever going to make a movie.
Yeah.
I think it's really funny when you said like, I wrote these big budget ones, and then I was like, I'll make a smaller one, $10 million, and then it's like I'll make a smaller one, $1 million, and it's funny because there's this idea as you're preparing these things of like, well, it'll be a lot easier to get financing for these lower budget stuff. But then the question is the same exact question, which is like, well, who's going to give it to you? Who is that person exactly? Like, can you envision the person that's going to give you 20 million? And are they that different than the person that gives you 1 million?
And I learned I like there were so many things that I just never anticipated being problems and like little stresses that I wouldn't have anticipated while doing this project that I understood for the first time, like why people don't trust you like first time filmmakers with $1 million. Because there's
Mm,
so much that happens. It's chaos.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, give me a really specific. Okay, like there's something that happened on your shoot. I don't know what it is that I wouldn't even know how to ask you so that you could get to that story. Like,
Yes.
what's the thing that you want to like tell somebody that happened that you're like really proud of, that you pushed through? You never think this thing was that hard, but this is why. And but I would never know to ask that question. What is that thing for you?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, the hardest thing in the entire shoot, I think, was filming on sand, which I know is maybe
Okay.
not exactly what you meant, but like the beach stuff that's in this movie, I am traumatized by. It took me a really long time to like those scenes because every time I saw it, I just tried to picture like us having to move the camera from one place to the next. It was so slow. I think everybody on the crew was like, "Oh, that was a rough day."
Was it just dirty, or what was the
It's
like?
just it's literally hard to walk in sand, let alone like picking up equipment and having to go do it. So like everything that we had scheduled that we thought was going to take say 20 minutes would then take 50. And so the whole day just felt like it was spiraling out of control all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that was the hard part. I think I was also in a like broader sense, I was surprised by the like barrage of opinions that I was greeted with when I started making the project. Of like you bring on a team and suddenly everyone's like, oh, maybe you should cast this person, or what if you did this visually, or whatever. And being able to like take all of that input and filter through it and figure out which ones were the better ideas and which ones I had to just like say, yeah, you're right, that's a great idea, let's do it, versus which ones felt like it was veering the project off course. That was kind of hard to navigate at first and a little overwhelming. And I think that was like the thing I was least expecting in terms of trying to make a project on this scale.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The what's funny is after your preparation as a director, Justin pointed this out one time, and I was like, that is so perceptive. He said, after your preparation, which is, you sit down with the script and envision it and try to figure it all out. Once you're bringing on people and needing to get that outside of yourself, it becomes an extraordinarily lengthy and intricate series of yes or no questions. And you
Yeah.
just have to get the yes and the no right enough to align with what you prepared. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
absolutely.
Was that your experience?
It was. And I think this project went through a really strange process too, because like I said, it was all reverse engineered to be extremely shootable. So I wanted it to be something that I could make alone. Since I was doing travel videography, I had my own DSLR kit and a mic. So I was like, worst case scenario, I got this. I was like ready to do it in whatever location I could find without permits, make it black and white, like very scrappy, just to be like, I'm going to make this movie no matter what. And so then as we were scaling it up, people came in and would say things like, I think we can, make it more ambitious. We can go get anamorphic lenses, things like that. And trying to figure out which of those things we could still do and like sustain on this production was one of the tricky parts, but I'm happy.
Well, if you did, you spent, how long were you a travel videographer, I guess, if that's the term?
It was like 2.5 years of almost full-time travel videography.
And you were completely solo, correct?
Yeah,
Which means
I would
sound, you did the video, you did the edit.
yeah, I would invite friends to come with me to like be the model in front of the camera at times. But even then, I didn't always have them, and I would have to like go put it on a tripod. hang
Yeah.
out in front.
Well,
But yeah,
what
I was,
I
for those
mean,
who haven't known me for half of my life, I was a travel videographer for 2.5 years before the pandemic. But
well, what okay, the question's going to sound like one thing, but I'm actually asking for another, which is,
yeah,
I want to know how that filtered into the film, but I don't mean in terms of your DIY
yeah,
abilities. What I mean is like, clearly you love travel.
yeah,
Your Instagram handle is like Wander Adams, or I think it is.
yeah.
It's like, this is not a road trip film, but like, it seems like if you weren't a filmmaker, something involving city hopping would be, I don't know, maybe I'm putting words in your
No,
brain, but like
to
what would
me,
you do if you weren't a filmmaker? And then I know you'd die, but you get what I mean. You weren't a filmmaker, and then how does that then become something in American Meltdown?
yeah. Um, well, I know that sorry, I'm trying to like sift through all the questions, but basically I know that I can see like directly the impact that all the travel videography had on this project, because I was forced to just show up in locations I had never been to and figure out how to make them look good on camera, like on a dime. And through that, I started relying on location photography and natural light a lot. And I started setting up my entire shoot so that I would, be using the windows of sunlight that are great in the morning and the afternoon, and figuring something else out to do in the middle of the day. And I think that's why this movie relies on natural, beautiful locations a lot. Obviously, we have like a lot of interiors, but then when it just goes to the beach or the mountains or the desert, part of that was me just wanting to go have fun on location and to like take advantage of how beautiful the world is, and my obsession with how good those landscapes look. And those entire days, like our shooting schedules were reverse engineered around all the light tricks that I picked up while being a travel videographer. So yeah, I don't know exactly how obvious it is to people, but to me, I see it in every frame of like, oh yeah, I was in Argentina when I came up with that idea or whatever. And then also Mari's van life and all of the photos that she has and all of that
Of course.
is, yeah, it comes directly out of what I had just lived through, because of essentially like I at times was pitching this to people as like Olivia and Mari being two separate sides of my personality, and Olivia being like how I grew up and was taught to live and still had so much of that in me, and then Mari being this representation of like the few years that I had spent before the pandemic just out in the world doing whatever I wanted. And it was, this movie in some ways was like me trying to figure out how to mesh the two of them, those two sides of me, into one.
That's can you talk even more about that, about the autobiographical side of the film? Because also I know there's an event that you know go ahead.
Yeah, well, there's so many events that this is hands down like the most personal thing I've ever written. Um, I love genre movies, and I'm so stoked to be at Chattanooga specifically because of how much I love genre movies. But when I was trying to reverse engineer something that I knew I could shoot, I was really nervous about the like art or whatever, like all the things that can make genre just a little more expensive. And I know there's probably like 50 filmmakers here who did amazing things with no money, so good as to them. But I got freaked out by it. And so when I was kind of pulling the genre elements out of my brainstorming, what I was left with, I was like, I got to go more personal. And so like every single line in this movie, it feels like it's some coded reference to something that happened to me or something that happened to a friend. Um, like the way that she gets fired for 3 months happened to a close friend of mine, happened to a lot of people in the film industry. I think when California updated some of their labor laws, that was the workaround that a lot of the companies did. So just so many like freelance editors I knew were out of work for 3 months, and I was just watching them struggle. And so like that went in. Um, yeah, it's all very personal. And then because of the pandemic, I had lost my own dream job, this travel videography thing, and didn't know how I was going to pay rent and all that. And I think all of those anxieties kind of filtered into this movie, which obviously doesn't like rent.
Yeah. There's a something, just because I know you, there's a
Uh-huh.
very specific inciting incident that happened to you.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about that?
Yeah, the break-in,
Yeah. Yeah.
or the 5 break-ins, I should say.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, the back at FSU, I lived in my senior year. I lived in this place with this guy Ryland, who's a very talented filmmaker himself, does a lot of DIT and color work, and comes up with his own companies. But he and I had this house, and we would throw a lot of parties for the film school and things. And I remember there was one night where just a lot of people were at that house, and we didn't necessarily know all of them. And we are like, whatever, come on in. But then within a week or two, we came home and somebody had like smashed a window and taken all of our stuff. And that started to trigger a lot of PTSD and freaked out feelings. Every creak in the house would put me on edge. So, but yeah, so Rylan and I were living in this house. We were so paranoid. I remember there was one night specifically where I had tried to close the door and it was left open ajar. So when Rylan came home, he just found the door open. And so he came in convinced that there was another break-in, and he picked up a knife. And then I started hearing somebody in the house, but hadn't heard like the keys unlocking a door or anything. So I picked up a hammer. And so we each came around a corner, like both ready to hurt someone, and almost killed each other. So there's just so much paranoia. And then it happened. And I remember the cops came, and the cops were very unhelpful. They even said, like, we're pretty sure this was your neighbors, but we can't do anything about it. So sorry. I remember specifically the cop that came had braces. And I don't know why, but that was deeply unsettling to me at the time. And if any of you have braces, cool. I'm happy for you. I had braces, but it was just really unnerving to have this like authority figure who was supposed to like come fix everything for me, kind of feel like they were high school or something. And I'm so sorry if any of you have braces and are self-conscious of it. But yeah. So we had that. And then so then I moved to LA. Specifically, when you moved out of a room, I moved into the house. And
Oh yeah, you took over my...
while we were there, somebody else broke in. I forget if you know this, but one of my roommates, Colin, he left for work one day and somebody saw him leave. And so they crawled into his window, but me and my other roommate, Charles, were still there. And so there was just somebody in the house all of a sudden. And Charles woke up and went and was like, hey, what are you doing here?
Oh my God. And the guy just, what did he do? Did he, because I think Charles actually told me this story, but didn't he just say like, what are you doing here? And the guy's like, uh-oh, I was just looking for my, and then like walked out the door, something like that. So, well, there was a word that you used that I've always remembered, because you're the only person I know that I've gotten a really in-depth story about getting broken into. And you're like, I didn't really care as much about my stuff getting taken. Obviously you cared.
Yeah.
You
Yeah,
said
it was so bizarre.
really violated. Like it was just like
Sorry,
somebody now knows me intimately and in some way that I wasn't expecting. Is that, does that feel like the experience you were doing for the movie as well?
Yeah, sorry. This is about to become a little interactive tour of my dad's house because I think I'm having some service issues.
You're
So
okay.
this is my dad behind me.
What if it's just like this unbelievable mansion is like walking through, there's like 18 Teslas,
Yeah,
It's like, whoa, where are you right now?
Okay, is my service a little better right now though?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, cool. And now we have an audience.
It's been seamless so far. I've been filling in gaps.
Okay. Okay, great.
But yeah, I was just asking about how you use the word violated, and that seems like something that there's definitely the like, hey, I'm broke, don't take my stuff. There's definitely, of course, the paranoia of coming back and how do they do that. But I found it really interesting as you were describing it to me, and as I saw in American Meltdown, how it just felt like a stranger now knows me in a way that I wasn't asking for,
Yeah, it's really unnerving. I remember just being so upset that somebody had been in my house and never feeling safe in it ever again. And I had never seen that feeling captured in a movie before. So I remember at first I was like, oh, I'm going to turn this into a home invasion thriller, but I'm going to ground it in like some real emotion. And then it just pivoted off into completely different directions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, what do you think is, there's a long tradition of movies that start with the word American, so I guess the question is, of course I want to just talk about the title itself, but what about the movie to you is specifically American? And for me, it's self. I want to see if you've got, go ahead.
Well, I remember being a kid and seeing movies that had American in the title, like American Beauty, and just being like, this doesn't mean anything. And I don't know, as a kid, I never understood it. And now as an adult, I can look at those movies and it becomes fun to try to figure out how in some ways they like symbolize life in certain slices of America. For me, I think during the pandemic, I was frustrated with a lot of like money and financial stuff. And then I started looking back at the years since graduating and how like when we graduated, it was just before the recession. And I remember going to New York looking for work and spending months like just on people's couches, finding nothing. And I was so, I think at the time I internalized a lot of that of like, oh, I really screwed up that summer. Like I couldn't find a job. I wound up landscaping for a while. And I don't mind where it led me because it forced me to go find a lot of cool things. But yeah, at the time, like I said, I internalized it. And I think once the pandemic happened and I started looking back and reflecting on a lot of the challenges that I had hit in those years after school, trying to find steady work and stability and all that, I started to realize how national a lot of those events were and how so many of my friends were going through the same thing. And it started to feel very hyper specific to like people who had graduated in 2008 or 2009, went through a lot of these same specific milestones. And yeah, I was just really frustrated by it. And I think maybe it was super obvious to everyone, but for me, it was this little awakening that it wasn't so personal, that there was maybe some societal stuff happening. And so it all started to filter into this movie, which was kind of me working through a lot of those emotions. And so that's why the word American got slotted in there.
Oh, that's okay. Actually, I'm really glad I asked that question because that was not that makes a lot of sense, is that you made something that's so personal to the point of being semi-autobiographical, and yet you started realizing that it's not. And I think that's and that's a very national issue and global issue.
Yeah.
There's actually like on that, there's a line that I love. I'm gonna butcher it, but it's something like, she's insisting that it's the car battery because she can't afford it if it's it is the car battery, because if it's the engine, then that's impossible. And the rejection of reality and that kind of like unbelievable frustration of what feels like a rule that's been imposed on our generation that wasn't imposed on other ones, that's really, I think you've captured that really well. And same thing with like, she opens the door to the cop and the cop's on his phone, and it just feels like that's
Yeah.
My brother-in-law is a cop and he's awesome. But I get what you mean, is this idea is like, are they going to help me unless someone was murdered? Like, is that going
Right.
to,
Yeah.
this is a big city thing though. It is almost
I know.
like
Yeah,
we're urban boys, me and you, I think. And
yeah.
I think that's go ahead, please.
Yeah. I think there's some stuff in here that is hyper specific to like California labor law that to me is just like lived experience. And I am worried that like someone in Chattanooga, for instance, might watch it and be like, what are they talking about? That's never happened to me. No. I hope it's more universal than that, but I'm worried that
I'll
it might
tell
not
you,
be.
one filmmaker to another, the more specific you get, the better. As long as it's not total gibberish, it's because there's always some analog, even if it's not specific.
Yeah.
Same. I think
I will say
movies are boring,
Yeah. And that was a lesson that I took from this. I tried to get as personal as possible. And by doing that, a whole bunch of people started to relate to it. But some of my favorite moments on set would be when we would film dialogue and people on the crew would really relate to it. One of the moments I think of so often, there's a scene, it's the one where Mari is just licking a lemon for like 4 minutes. And Olivia's walking behind her and she's venting about how she has to pay $600 for not registering as a small business. Again, hyper-specific California thing, I think. But that happened to me, happened to a bunch of people on the crew. And while I was rehearsing that with the actors, our AC for the day overheard them and didn't realize that it was dialogue. He thought that it was just them having a conversation. And he was like, yo, that happened to me too. And we're like, okay, cool. We're rehearsing. And he's like, no, I have to vent. And he just came over and for like 5 minutes took the floor and started, he was so upset about this law. And that's when I was like, okay, I guess this scene has to stay in the movie.
Yeah, I mean, I got that letter too. Like, I know what you're talking about.
It's so frustrating.
Yeah.
The most
understand what we're doing here.
It's wild. The most universal note I got from putting the script out and like sharing with people was like, people would write back like, did you also have to pay $600? Because it happened to everyone who did the script. I don't know how like we all missed that law.
Yeah. Well, what's funny is I'm thinking about how you started out I mean, this feels very much to me like a continuation of the kinds of things that I would work with you on in film school, you know?
Yeah, I was
And
actually
in
curious
a
to
good way,
see.
in a way that
Yeah,
you have a consistent point of view, but you grow as a filmmaker. And
yeah,
I I kind of wonder is when you say you graduated, you started writing big budget sci-fi and then smaller and smaller and smaller, is is this for you in many ways like an audition for something larger, like a lot of low budget films are? Or is this the exact kind of film that you do? You just want to be able to pay people more to make them. Does that make sense?
yeah. I mean, I love when I say even bigger budget things, I'm not necessarily talking about like, well, first off, if anybody is listening to this and wants me to like make a Jurassic World movie or something, then yes, it was an audition. But the honest answer is that I came to love the indie side of things so much over the course of this. And I would love to get bigger budgets that I can pay people. I had to do so much of the work on this and do so many of the jobs. And even like there are certain people on the crew who were volunteers. We tried to pay people, but even when we did, it was often minimum wage. We had such a small crew on this, and I felt guilty about how like I wanted people to be taken care of. And so
Mhm.
that was like one of the big things that I wanted was just to be able to make projects with more support for everyone. But I do love this like kind of indie character based world. I made this purely as an act of expression at a certain point because I felt like I had to make a movie and I wasn't really worried about like what path it was going to push me down or what doors it would open specifically in terms of like which projects might people look at this and think I would be good for. I just wanted to make something. And I think in doing that, I learned how important it is to ground things in character and to get really personal and intimate. And I want to keep doing that going forward. Personally, I do love like suspense and horror and genre stuff. So I want to figure out how to take the lessons I learned from this and start integrating it into more genre things. But
Mm. Mhm.
so that's my big hope going forward.
Yeah, that makes sense. So character focused genre feels like the meaning what you did right here plus a little more genre, kind of, right? Is that the
Yeah,
idea?
exactly. Yeah.
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 That makes
Um,
sense.
yeah. So I think, but I don't know. That's also like one of the big questions is navigating like what's the creative path look like and creating a body of work. And I'm still, I think, trying to wrap my head around
Yeah.
how to do that. Yeah.
Well, you know, it's
Also,
you
real quick, I know I'm sorry to cut you off, but I don't know if you remember this. I probably should have led with this because it goes back to the start of the project, but you were the first person I ever talked to about this movie. I
oh
don't know if you remember it, but I sent you an email that I have on my phone right here.
look it up.
Um,
Go ahead.
yeah, it's DIY micro ideas. And it says, "Hey man, hope you're doing well, blah, blah, blah. I want to make a movie. I've been trying to brainstorm ideas that I can shoot alone, worst case with my own GH5, natural light, 2 lavs, and a Rode VideoMic Pro. I'd love to find something that is both creatively fulfilling and truly producible. Here's 3 ideas. What do you think?"
Yeah.
And page one of them says idea 1, relationship post-invasion. Logline, a young couple arrives home one day to discover that somebody has broken into their home and left inexplicably. We follow them afterwards as they grow increasingly paranoid that it's going to happen again, and as PTSD phrase their relationship. And this is, I say in the email, I had that an idea an hour before emailing you. So it's very half-baked. So within an hour of coming up with this plan to like go do a micro budget, I had emailed you for advice and you wrote back, that post-invasion one is personal, relatable, shootable now without having to coerce a whole group of people into working on it, has all the resources at your disposal, and is to me the most intriguing premise. I don't know where it goes from there, but I love it. And then you sent me off into the world with some encouragement. And now, like 3 years later, here I am talking to you at a Q&A. So it feels pretty great.
That's cool. That's really cool. I
Yeah.
have found that email and that's really interesting because I'm seeing also there's other big budgety kind of ideas that I'm kind of shooting down and saying like, no, you got to have something right now. And I'm glad it worked
Yeah,
out for you. That's really cool, man.
absolutely.
I love it.
Yeah, and thank you. You have been like on a personal note, even though everyone's watching. You've been like a great source of guidance throughout this whole thing. Anytime I ever needed advice, I'm like, how do I find the right sound person? Or like, what sort of cameras do we use? You kept an open door, and it
Oh,
is so appreciated and a big part of the reason I'm here. So thank you for
oh, of
everything.
course. And actually, and also, you know, I mean, when we do test screenings of any of our films, we always send it out to a small group of people first, just to see if we're even on the right like path as we're editing. You're always on that list, and always love getting your first round of notes there. And of course, I mean, I know you were just talking about like where to go next. What's film two basically, and I think, not to sound too doom and gloom, but the indie world right now is a total nightmare on an economic level, but on a creative level, it is doing so well because of movies like yours can exist with like no budget kind of, what Robert Rodriguez did back in the day is starting to become more and more common, and creatively we're getting really interesting stuff like American Meltdown, and Chattanooga is a huge part of like being able to get those out there, because it only happens at festivals first, because otherwise you have to pay for it. You have to pay for that press. If you haven't heard of it already, then you're paying for it, except for film festivals who have dedicated people and audiences that are just looking for something cool and unique. And so like, I guess my point is like, thank God for films like yours. Thank God for things like Chattanooga, because that's the only thing holding this aloft. Truly, like there's not this other pillar of the independent film industry. It starts right here, and that's like really cool. So
inspiring. Just feel like I don't even want to add to that, because they just feel like perfect closing words, like you handcrafted them. So
what's funny is I realized as I was saying, it sounds like I prepared that. I really didn't. I was just kind of thinking about it as like, where else do indie films come from? And it's like, well, when they don't come from festivals, they have at least a few $1 million behind them, and and that's just so rare. So it's festivals is where it all happens. It always has been that way, but it feels even more true now. So. I'm
honestly also so excited to go to Chattanooga specifically, like just to give a little shout out to the festival real quick. When I listen to the interviews with like Chris, or like any interaction I've ever had with anybody on this programming team, they are so enthusiastic and they love movies so much. I'm like really honored to be a part of it. And the fact that they treat genre as seriously as they do is great. I love it. So I'm really, really excited to be here.
Yeah. Well, your movie's awesome. Cannot wait to start being able to tell people about it. And really quick, where to reach you online if people want to Q&A you a little harder.
I am not on a ton of social medias. I might get back on Twitter, just because like I'm realizing it would be great to. I would love to be in touch with people. I just opened a Letterboxd account, so you can find me on there. It tends to be Wander Adams at almost every place. Wander being an anagram of Andrew, but also like Wander the World. So Wander Adams is my Instagram. If you're creative with emails, you might be able to find my email, all sorts of things. So like, feel free to reach out. I'm very stoked to talk to anyone. And at a certain point, there might be like Wander Adamses on other sites too.
Do you feel like if you're not on social media very much, do you think you should maybe give out your phone number?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, or you have it. You can decide whether or not to dox me.
I'll tweet out your phone number.
Would you like my social security?
No, that's not useful to me. I just need your phone.
No.
Cool, man. Thank you for a wonderful movie, and
thank you.
Thank you for this is our 8 million of our conversations, but glad to be able to share it with people.
Yeah, it honestly feels full circle in a really nice way. So thanks for being here.